There. And is it Jackie or Jacques or Jackie?
Jackie.
Okay. And I'm sorry if you've been on and I didn't recognize the name before, but if you're a first timer, welcome.
I finally made one.
Good, good. Have you been able to see some of them on YouTube at least in the meantime, or is this really just the first time in? That's okay if no, that's fine.
I have not.
Okay.
But
Well,
now
well,
I will.
that's okay. They're there, and as are all of the John Cogswell book things from the last 2 years. So those are open and available for anyone. But what it means is that I'm going to run down a couple of things for you as a new person, just to make sure you got the basics. Obviously, we are being recorded, and by being here, you agree to that, because they're going up on the YouTube there. Um, and this is really very casual. You do not have to be here for all the sessions. You didn't miss anything that you can't catch up on by watching the videos if you so choose, or you just sort of come and go as you need to. Normally we're going to meet on the third Wednesdays, but this time, gang, and I'll say it a couple times during the session, in November, we are going to go a week early because of my travel schedule due to shows. So the November session will be on the 13th. Just keep that in mind, and I'll send out an email to everyone on that too. Obviously, be safe doing these things in your studio. You're the final line of defense on your own safety. And this is really designed to be a conversation. We're going to have a lot of talking back and forth. So feel free to pipe up with opinions or questions, or ask for ideas or support. And it's mute or unmute as you see fit. Just try and be mindful of other folks. As a general rule, my teaching approach is take as many classes from as many people as you can possibly study with. We all have different ways of doing things, and your way will eventually evolve into the amalgam of all of those different techniques. I am still taking classes, and I will continue as long as I'm able. And we're going to see the results of some of those today when we start up. And yeah, if there's any specific things that as we're going, you go, wow, I really wish I could get a little more understanding of how that works, or if there's a project that you've seen from my work that you wonder how it was done, as we work through, once we get past the bulk of this big project that I'm working on now, I'll be going in and doing some of those things that are more interesting to any of us that might help us all progress our projects. So that's the general spiel. For everybody that's on, if you are interested and in the Seattle area in November or Marlborough area in Massachusetts, I have tickets to the 2 shows I'm doing in November that are usually an at-the-door fee. If you're interested in those, I would suggest you sign up for my mailing list on my website, because I'll be sending out a notice when they're ready to get sent out for people, and they'll be first come, first serve on that list. Blah, blah, blah. That's I'm rolling through all of my things. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to pipe up. And I'm going to paste in the Facebook a bunch of different links that are useful to you if you want to go to all the places related to this. So we've got my general link that tells you all the different places you can go about me, my socials, where my class schedules are, that kind of thing. We've got the YouTube for the videos. We got the Facebook group, which is very low activity, mostly because I don't make it active by posting questions and so on. And then my Instagram is one of the best places to see what I'm working on when I'm in midstream, or what shows I'm doing, classes, and so on. And last of my businessy things is, if you are a Rio user who is not already a Rio Pro, here is a code that you can put in on your account and get yourself 6 months of Rio Pro equivalent. That it doesn't cover, it doesn't reduce tool price usually. I think it covers most of the other things that pros get. So you can register with as many teachers as you want, but you still only get the 6 months at a time. When one 6 months runs out, I believe they let you re-up if you've got a code from another instructor to come in. So that's for anybody on the call, and it's in the chat. What else? Do I have any other businessy things I've forgotten, gang? It's a lower key list than when I was doing the Cogswell stuff.
your classes that you're teaching?
Yeah, I actually ended up, because I wasn't getting my schedule was my timing on this fall's classes was so awful. It was squeezed in between Thanksgiving and Christmas that I wasn't getting any traffic. So I've actually postponed them. But that leads to a question that I would love input from you guys on. If you were to take classes in 2025, either virtually or in person from me, what subjects would you like them to be about, and where would you like to see me teaching? I'm looking into teaching in Connecticut and Massachusetts again in March, potentially. I'm also going to teach in Portland, Oregon. I would love to teach in Portland, Maine, but that's not on the schedule right now. And I'm open to other places as long as they're open to me and my schedule permits. So if you have ideas, throw them out there. If not, tell me later when you think of it. So I'll definitely do at least one Hollowforms session. It sounds like I may do a lot, an in-person Hollowforms in Portland this year, or I may do clasps live in Portland, or I may do both. And I'm waiting to hear what my Connecticut and Massachusetts schools would like from me in March. So any thoughts on that one, gang? Any interest? Then there's also, of course, virtual classes, which I'll do as well. If anybody has thoughts. Fort Worth, Texas. If somebody were to tell me what studios they're working at in Fort Worth that might want to have me there as a guest instructor. I don't know that I have a huge following in Texas right now, so I don't know whether the classes would be fillable easily, but I'm open to it. Is there a specific school you were thinking of?
What do you normally prefer for a head count?
So I like between 6 and 8 people when I'm doing in person. I have done up to 10.
Okay.
But really about talking to the school about whether they can cover the costs. It just becomes more expensive for each student if I do fewer than that. I generally find that 3 is the minimum to make it worth the engagement. Like students don't get as much out of it unless there's at least 3. And I do private and semi-private lessons, but if it's in person somewhere like Texas, it's going to cost a lot because it's got to get me there and cover my expenses and that sort of thing. So, but yeah, feel free to send me details if there's somebody you think I should reach out to. But I'm open to travel if it works with my schedule. And I've always been curious about that great show in Fort Worth, the
Main Street Arts Festival?
Main Street. Yes, I've always been curious about it. So if it were somewhere around that time, then I could come see the show and check it out.
It's usually in April.
Yeah. Yeah, I generally, when I'm traveling, I try to get a couple things in, which means that I'm trying to either work for one of my day job clients, or trying to make sure that I can get schools on either end or a craft show that I'd like to go to. So that's why Connecticut and Massachusetts are getting some shows this weekend. I mean, some classes next year. So okay, any questions about all of that introductory stuff from anyone old or new to the program? Cool. Okay, I'm going to remind everyone of some of the basics that we talked about when we first started this series, which is the box of unfinished things. Everybody's got them. We've all got projects, whether they're bagged or boxed, it doesn't matter, that are sitting aside. Either we broke a stone, or we found we had an idea and it just didn't excite us halfway through, whatever. My hope is that as I'm doing my work through my box of things, that you guys are pulling some stuff out, and I've seen some of that effort as we go. But when you're doing that, one of the things that's hard to do is identify what you want to do next. So sometimes you'll discover that it's blocked because of the design. Sometimes it might be blocked because you don't have the materials, or you don't like the materials you chose. Sometimes it's a technique block or a skills block. And that's usually less true than you believe it to be, I'm going to say. I will often find that I have frozen solid because I'm sure I can't do something. And then when I take it apart into smaller bites, I realize, wait a minute, that's just like a little tweak on something I already have done. Or it's you go out and you take a class and you learn the specific technique to get the vision in your head to match your skills. Like it may be that if you put it in the box for a year, you come back to it and you're like, oh, why did I think that was hard, right? So separate those or go out and make an effort to go learn the skill that you're looking for. And sometimes it's that we really just don't like the piece. Like it just, we thought we would like it, we didn't like it. That's okay. There's a bunch of other reasons, but those are the, sort of at the heart, or some combination of them is at the heart of it. So think about separating what's in the box into things you're never going to get back to, things that you want to take apart for components, things that you want to redesign completely, like the one we're working on in the first sections here. So separate out the box and make it more manageable instead of the overwhelming pile of things. With that in mind, does anybody have any things that they are stuck on or want some idea generation? Because we usually start out with people showing and telling, or showing and asking, as the case may be. Anyone? Come on.
I have something
Laura.
simple, I
Okay.
guess.
I'm going to spotlight you, and people help me remember to put myself back on spotlight when we're back to my stuff, because I forgot last time. Look at that studio full of tools. Super exciting. What do you got?
I've been working on cuffs.
Nice. Brass, bronze.
Bronze. You know, I like to work in bronze because of the
Yeah.
costs.
Yes.
And so I got some sheets, and I guess cuffs are really hot right now. So I have a
Yeah.
show coming up.
Nice.
Then I've been working on wrapping,
Okay.
and then I was trying to figure out this design.
So why did you choose wrapping for that? Is it because you had the bead-like device that you wanted?
Because I had them, and I
Okay.
was thinking about repurposing something that
Yeah.
I already had,
Nice.
but I don't want to solder. Is
Okay.
the challenge.
Got it. Got it.
So that's the idea. And I had several of them that I had already done.
Ooh, that's a cool piece.
So I just need help in terms of, I was thinking about maybe putting a hole here in the middle so it can drop.
Yeah.
That'd be cool.
And then I thought, well, maybe I can just drill a hole here and then somehow wrap it.
Yeah. Or rivets.
That's the other
Cool.
thought, was rivets.
Yeah.
I've been looking at that rivet system.
If he's
So
got
I'm
any in
so
stock,
confused.
it's hard to, if he
Yeah.
doesn't always have them.
Rio has them,
Oh, okay.
but ring and things. I like they have it also, but what I like about ring and things is they have the other parts as well.
Okay.
Where
Got it.
Rio doesn't seem to have everything.
Gotcha. So what happens if instead of looking at up and down, you take that bead that you had and rotate it so that your rings are this way,
Oh,
right?
uh-huh.
Does that get, so I'm not in camera, bear with me. Let me move my camera a little bit because my system is a little out of whack. No, rotate, so the same direction you had it, although that's another one to consider is, can you wrap anything under? But take it that way. But instead of putting your jump ring ends flush against it, when you flip them up on their edge, literally perpendicular like this. So right now you've got them this way to the metal. What happens when you turn them this way?
I can't see you.
Oh, sorry. Here, let me. So when you turn them this way, and you've been holding them this way on the metal, when you turn
Yeah.
them this way, right? So that they're upright along the metal. There you go.
Okay.
What opportunities does it give you for working around the metal through the holes? Is it anything, is that inspire anything? So that you could put, like, you could put you metal that you've made. Here, let me draw. I'm doing a bad job with words. I was on literally 7 hours of calls on the data starting at 6 o'clock this morning.
Oh,
So let me draw.
that's way too early.
What really is. They get one of those a month from me. Okay, let me get back to the screen. So you've got your arch, right? And
Uh-huh.
if you have sideways, and here's your bead,
Mm-hmm.
and then you can run things through them like this, right? If they're upright, and that gives it a little more movement. It may need a smaller jump ring, but basically, if we were looking side view, it would be like this for your bead, and then we would drive something through it to the other side and attach it down, riveting through in 2 spots. Right, so that's one option, one type of rivet, and that gives it the ability to do a little spinning in place because your bead can be lifted off the cuff, which kind of gives a cool factor to that. You've got, if you keep it flat the way that you had it, then you could make a giant tube rivet. If you made a rivet that was, so if we've got it resting against there, like you had it in the initial one, making a tube rivet that goes around and holds it down, you'd need to make a little slot for where the wire comes up.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody have other ideas for her of connecting those without using SATA? Anybody who's doing any weaving, I mean, any wrapping that has other thoughts on that one? Because there's got to be some wrapping techniques for exactly that reason.
Weaving would be cool.
What would be?
Weaving, that's a really cool idea to do some weaving down the sides and
Yeah.
incorporate those jump rings.
So weaving off of it, basically using it as the starting point, like macrame style at the top and bringing something down. Yeah.
Yeah, even weaving around that little jump ring flat against the I'm a drawer too, so um what do I
Then
wanna say?
what would the connection to the bracelet be? Would it be woven all the way front and back so that it sort of is a case around the metal? Is that what you're envisioning? How does
You
she
know,
hold it down?
it'd be really cool with that your loop at the end. If you wove around that loop all the way around the bracelet, so it's like a twisted wire around it almost looking, but you could weave that through your backplate. Of course, that'd be a lot of drilling if you don't mind drilling it. And drilling
I
on
don't mind
that,
drilling. I don't mind
drilling
drilling.
on a curved piece is kind of tough, but interesting.
Yeah, so you're saying like a row of drill holes that she's using to stitch around, basically?
Yeah,
She stitches through?
stitching.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
That would be cool too.
So
Interesting.
some kind of integration of the weave or the stitch, whatever you want to call it, wrapping around your existing jump ring. Here, this one I think I might be able to visualize. I draw for you based on what Jackie said. Let's see. So I think what you were implying, Jackie, and tell me if I'm way off base, is that along the border of the piece, we put a whole slew of holes. And we've got this baby here that you've got already built with your bead in the middle. And this little wire connector. And then you're gonna do some kind of stitching that goes around all of this and through and around and through in some way, whether it's down each stitch or what have you, coming back up from the other side. Is that
Cool
sort of
too.
the gist of what you were looking for? I mean, there's
Let's see if I can-
got a page that you can show us? Hang on, let me spotlight you instead of me.
Okay, I don't know if I can get this out of the blur though. I was thinking
So
about
if your background is set to don't show my background, then it won't show things other than you really.
okay. Hold on a second. Let me figure that out. Oh, got it. Oops. Oh, man. There we go. Does that work? Yay!
Yep. And
Okay.
then a little farther back.
There
Oh,
we go.
doesn't want to focus on that. For some reason, it's
I
still
know.
focusing on you. Yeah, put it in front of your face. As much as we would like to see you while you're talking, it may be.
It's okay. Let's see if I can enlarge it. I've never done this.
You can scoot it
Basically,
closer, I think. There we go.
what I was thinking was weaving around your loop
Mm-hmm.
just there, but I like your idea on the edges too. I
Okay.
mean, you could even do some like cross
Oh,
hatching.
you were talking about the holes being right around her loop and stitching
Yeah.
around and around. Oh, that's even cooler. Oh, I love that.
Well, and you could do like X's or
Yeah,
something interesting too. Maybe even incorporate an X over your stone or something with it. Who knows? It's endless.
yeah. Oh, that's a great idea. I was sorry, I was envisioning you sort of like all around the piece, but no, I like yours. It's much neater than I was
I like the
envisioning.
border.
Lots of opportunities to play with.
Oh,
Any
wow.
other ideas besides
Thank
wire
you.
holding down the wire or riveting of various sorts?
She wanted some kind of cold connection.
Yep.
Mhm.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing to do is potentially attach it down to leather and add the
Ooh,
leather band with rivets again to the metal. So you've
oh,
got
that'd be
sort of
cool.
support.
You
Where
could
would the
even use
leather
like
be?
What,
you
Like
where,
could even
what?
around it?
I would envision like a strip that the bead rests on, and maybe your hole is actually cut through not only the metal but the leather, so it's got like a little nest of the leather strip. Um, just something
yeah.
that gives some support to the wire layer, because my only worry is the flex of the bracelet of the cuff and the flex
Mhm.
of the wire may fight each
Mhm.
other unless you do
Mhm.
that full wrapping thing that Jackie was mentioning, because that would give it a lot more strength. Right now, you've got your weak spot is where the wire runs into the bead, right? So any
Mhm.
flex that happens there is going to give over time is going to give wear. But if you have it resting on a
Mhm.
bed of something like leather or something, velvet could be any number of things. That gives it a little protection from the flex.
You can get leather scraps from the leather companies like Tandy, and
Yeah.
old belts work really well for textured leather too.
Yeah, one of my favorite
I
instructors, Joy Raskin, out of New Hampshire, she buys leather belts at TJ Maxx on their discount rack and turns them
Oh, wow.
into the most spectacular silver clasped cuffs. They're just amazing. So yeah, scrap and find what you got. What else you got for us?
Well, I was sort of playing with leather because I have
ooh,
a lot of
Watch band?
old vintage watch bands.
Nice.
So that was
oh,
another thought. I
That's
do have a
spectacular.
bunch of them. So so it's interesting that you said that with the leather.
That's a
Um,
spectacular piece. That is that will go to the steampunk crowd. You can customize it for people. It'll go to watch collectors, the
that's cool.
Victorian. Yeah, that's
okay.
beautiful.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's really pretty.
Okay. Then maybe I should consider this too. Okay. Thank you.
I just as a concept, I think it's a great collection piece like that. That whole, you could do a whole line of those and they would go gangbusters.
Well, I got a lot
Nice,
of leather like this.
right?
I have a lot of
Although
them.
that's the kind of thing that there are crazy Facebook groups and like eBay listings and things like that where, a watchmaker closed down or a watch repair shop closed down and they've got 2,000 watch bands available.
Mm-hmm.
Any of the metal ones that are high end are going to go individually because they're so bloody expensive, the Rolex replacements and stuff. But the leather
Mm-hmm.
bands you might be able to find in bulk or at your local, whatever your biggest city's fashion district is. That's the kind of thing you might find in the leftovers bins. So Cool idea. All right. Anything else you want to show?
That's it. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else want to show anything? Going once, going twice.
I just learned how to make a basket for a faceted gem.
Nice.
Hold on, let me see if I can. This is my first one. Let's see if I can hold it up.
Nice.
Oh,
Very
yeah.
nice. Can you show it face on so you can see the baskety part?
I don't have the prongs done yet. Let's see. There we go.
Beautiful.
So I
Nice
just
stone.
learned. Eesh. Man, this is hard.
Yeah. So when it's little stuff, if you put your hand behind it, your camera can
Oh.
usually focus.
I get it. Okay. Yeah, I was pretty excited about that because I've got a lot of faceted stones just sitting around. And
Nice.
I'm like, okay, I need to really work on this.
Do you have a project in mind for it? Or are you just doing it for the exercise and then you'll figure out what you want to use it for?
I took a small 1-day class on making them, so I don't have any projects yet, but I sure have a lot of stones sitting around.
Nice.
Sitting
Nice.
for a while.
Awesome.
I-
Congratulations. That's a tough thing to do. The prong settings are one of the harder ones out there. So good job.
Prongs were okay, but the basket was like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
a challenge.
Yep.
So I'm into hollow forms,
Okay.
and I made this one, and I'm struggling. Let's see if I can hold it up now. There we go.
Yep. Beautiful.
It's a, well, let me get it in focus. It's a hollow form,
Nice.
solid, but I'm kind of struggling with, I did an oval. Hold on, let me put it on my pencil. Maybe that'll help. I made an,
Put
it doesn't
your
like-
hand right behind it. There you go. And then
There we go.
we get to
Sorry,
focus.
I
Yep.
don't do this. It's textured in the front, and then of course it's got my stamp on the back. But I put
Nice.
an
Very nice.
oval jump ring on it, and I'm struggling with a necklace. I'm thinking I should just do like oval jump rings or oval make oval
Chain.
jump rings
Chain link.
and make the chain that way.
Yeah. So, what happens if you do a chain that's interrupted by a baby version of the oval in one or two spots?
Oh, that'd be cool. Like large ovals and then a small oval and a couple of large ovals.
No, I mean, literally make tiny versions of the hollow form. And so you've got chain link, chain link, chain link, surprise hollow form, chain link, chain link, chain link.
You know how hard it is to make these hollow
I
forms?
do. I make a lot of them. Yes, I
Oh.
know exactly how hard it is.
Okay,
Not
well,
for her. No.
here's a,
She's an
here's
expert
another-
at it.
here's another hollow form that I made.
Nice.
Cool.
Very
It's-
cool. And do you have a chain idea for that one?
I kind of wanted to hook on the corner here, put a hook and then a chain around. I don't know. This one just, I had the scrap texture, sorry.
Yep.
And I thought I had the work time with this thing. But anyways, those are a couple of the pieces that I made recently.
I'm a huge fan of front closing clasps because there's a lot of people who can't deal with behind their neck clasps. So it's very awkward. It's a great selling point. And another thing you can do is make it hooked on both sides so that if they want to, they can take it off and wear just the chain.
Or even another piece.
Or an alternate piece that they can swap in. Exactly. Yeah. There's a company based out of, I want to say upstate New York, that their entire collection is all about being able to swap out different earring colors for the same piece or a necklace piece that you can pop in and out. So multi-purpose is always a good thing. And you'll see in my work that I do a lot of, when I do a hollow form, I'll often do a chain link shape inspired by the hollow form. So in the case of that piece that you just showed us, I might want links that are that funky abstract rectangle shape. And they hang differently connected to one another than round or oval will.
Oh, that'd be kind of fun.
So play around with, so what I
Ooh.
like is I look for the theme that I can repeat in my design elements.
Okay,
Nice.
cool. I'm drawn while you.
Good,
Hey,
good deal.
thanks. Thanks.
Anybody have other thoughts on chains for that? Other ideas? Okay.
Hi, it's
Hi,
Nancy.
Nancy.
I apologize. For some reason, my Zoom wasn't working right, but I've turned it on and off, and now it seems to be. And I would just say, Jackie, that I'm just doing a prong setting class myself, and there's so many people on YouTube. So sometimes one way works well, and somebody's idea works better. So I wouldn't be put off by like that the prongs are hard, because some people will do like they'll take 4 wires, solder them together, and those are your prongs instead of taking 2 rings and trying to solder wire prongs onto it. So that's what I thought I had.
Right. Can you repeat that again? That process?
Okay, so if I take like cut 2-inch pieces of wire
Right.
and then solder them together. So lay 2, right? Do 2 side by side, and then do the next 2 and solder them together so you have a little bundle. Okay, and then figure out the size of your stone to make your jump rings that form the interior part of the basket. And you
Right,
solder
support.
those into those wires instead of taking 2 rings and trying to solder the prongs up against it.
So you're saying a
Okay.
V,
Okay.
putting a V together? 2 Vs?
Yeah, except it's 4, right? So these are soldered together here,
Yep.
like this, right?
And down at the base, they're all soldered together.
Down at the base,
Oh, I
because you
get it.
can cut that away afterwards. And
Got
that
it.
way
Okay.
too, what's nice, a lot of people do when they do the other approach is they solder the upper ring in first, and then you have to fit the lower one in. But on this one, you can solder that lower ring in first, and then the next one above
Okay.
it.
And if you're looking for other techniques, we also show in the Cogswell project from the last project I did, the videos are up and they have on each video, they have a little listing for the thing you may want to look at is making a modified pair of tweezers to help make the prong solder section easier, and then start with the round setting that John Cogswell teaches that I walked through in that exercise. And there's other shapes as well, because they become more challenging when you move on to other shapes. But there's a whole boatload of videos, I think 3 or 4 sessions worth of videos that we did those prong settings from his book. All right. Any other show and tell before we move on?
Mhm.
No? Okay. All right. I'm going to spotlight myself. Ooh, and I've been showing, I thought I was having my face with you guys, and I wasn't. I was having my board. That's okay. All right. So I'm going to share some things. As I said, I am a perpetual student myself, and that perpetual studenthood has inspired some things about our big project. I'm going to show a couple of cool things that are unrelated to our project, except that there's some neat Hollowforms in them. So I recently took a 4 Wednesday nights workshop on gauged earrings, which are super cool, and they were more intimidating than, or I thought they were more intimidating than they ended up being. And it's an excuse to work heavy, which is always fun, because that's usually one of my limitations. So this is a class with Janice von Itter, I'm not sure how to pronounce her last name, out of Silvera School, and they do both virtual and in person. And so some of it is forging. And this was me taking that idea of the forged earring and doing a version that fits with my ephemeris collection with raw sapphires. I of course can't try them on for you because I don't actually have gauged ears. Tunnels are a big thing, and these are just little tube tunnels. The little white thing is the equivalent of an earring back. It's just a rubber ring that can be put behind the ear to help hold them on. And these are done in all different sizes, so people gauge up as they're stretching their ears. Or they have their equivalent of posts, which are, this is like I think it was a 16 gauge. And just a comfort fit. And so this I made in keeping with my pendulum collection. And I was set off on this course because I have occasionally had people asking if I do versions of my designs in engaged sizes. And I realized that I wouldn't know where to begin. So it was cool to get the background on it. Another thing that's done is weighting your ears to help stretch them. And so they work big, and people want heavier things, but you still have to be careful, of course, of tearing through the ear and so on. So I wanted to do something big and weighted, but not too weighted. And I had these funky stones that I've been trying to use. This is a hollow form, and this one has multiple really interesting challenges in it that's not yet set, or I fling it around a little bit more. I don't know where my wax went to pull these out, so. But basically the construction of it, I had to make a template for myself and build this interior part, which is done in reticulation silver. I'm debating whether I'm going to do any Kembu on it. And then I had to make matched sets of the shape that was going on the exterior, and do one side and then the other as the hollow form. And then add to that the bezels. So this is my order of operations for this particular one. So top and bottom, bezel and bezel, and then the heavy gauge wire that's been shaped and formed into what I wanted for the earring hang. And when you're doing these, just like with other things that we do, what we're looking for is a decent balance. So this one, whoops, I'm a little out of frame. This one hangs a little bit more backwards than I wanted it to, but until I can see it on somebody with the right gauge ears, I can't be sure, because it may, the weight may hold it a little more balanced when it's in the ear, but broadly, that's just sort of the series of events that built up to this pair. And this is actually one of the more challenging hollow form shapes I've ever done. And those that have been with me for a while know that I've done a lot, because of having to get that narrowing taper on the interior wall. So this was some really cool challenges for me, both in terms of what it did was taking this class sort of turned my brain back on to think a little differently, right? I had been feeling pretty stagnant in designing new ideas, but so that was one of the exercises. And then with the tunnels, the little guys are all well and good, but the folks that want to go big tunnels need something bigger. And so what it is it's curved, just like you might make if you're doing a spinner ring or something like that. You'd put a little curve into it. And then you need one side a little smaller, unless somebody's really looking for the pain, because the idea is that the taller edge sort of stops it from coming out of the ear. And in this case, they sort of implied to me that they needed a bit of an interior dome. So this is a DAP dome as one side, and that's in Mokume-gane, so I'll be blackening it.
Wow.
I had some cool scraps of reticulation silver that had holes in them, and they sort of looked like moons. So people can wear these either direction and get a different look. So having them reversible. I'm going to blacken inside the interior just to give it some kind of cool effect, and do a little darkening and petite patination on both of these. Once I get the last of the jingly bits that were from the polishing out, because they don't want to all come out, but they got in, so I'll be able to get them out. So that was a cool class. And if you get a chance, if it's a subject that interests you, it's not as niche a market as it used to be, but it's the kind of thing that I would do more custom work. If somebody has a design of mine that they really want to see in that work. In this case, because I always, when I'm taking a class, try to think about how it will fit my own practice. 3 of these are fitting with collections of mine. So this is the ephemeris. This is the pendulum series with the druzy. And this goes with my trapezium collections, which are the hollow forms, which I'm now moving into a lot more Mokume-gane for the hollow forms. Any questions about those?
Nice work, Heather.
Thank you.
So
Fun
what,
stuff.
So
I was
so
just
different
wondering
that
what-
last one. I'm sorry, go ahead.
not to worry. I was just wondering what gauge is that wire? 12?
It depends on the, so it depends on the scale that you're working. So people have gauged ears that go, they could start counting into the 00s and go beyond that.
Wow.
If they want bigger, I think after about gauge 4, there's no coming back from the stretch. But so we did, like, I think we started with 12 gauge. I can check. I have my gauge right here, so I can stop being silly. I think this was 12 gauge. Well, maybe even bigger. 10 gauge. So these are 10. These were bigger than that. These are probably somewhere between 6. They're 6.5 is what it looks like. And this is 8 gauge. And then these are whatever that is for gauge. That diameter.
We'll measure that in inches.
Right. Exactly. And that's what's done, or millimeters, depending. So yeah, it was a cool way to, we get kind of stuck in our ways, and I realized that my own earring collections are kind of the same basic ear wires all the time, or posts all the time, and I wanted to break myself out of that a little bit and think about things differently. So it definitely got my mind working again the way I was hoping it would. And it was a nice lightweight, I could go for a few hours after work on it was 4 Wednesdays or something like that, 4 Thursdays. I can't remember what day we did. So keep an eye out if you're interested in that level of class, that not level, but that length and that short span kind of class, because Silvera does a lot of those kinds of things. And their camera setup is good, so you can see things there. Then I had the delight that is going to do an Alec Boyd class. And if you ever get the chance to take a workshop with Alec, he is one of the most delightful human beings ever. He's a sweetheart. And I took his class for a couple reasons. It was a hinged earring workshop, which is one of the things he's pretty well known for. And if you haven't seen his work, go take a look at it. 2 other things that drew me in, well, 3 other things. One is the hinge, and I will take a hinge class from anybody I can possibly take it from, because there's always more ways to do hinges. And with every class I take in which a hinge is part of the process, I learn new tips and tricks. So that was a biggie. And then he does a layering of gold and silver in his settings that is just stunning, because he blackens everything. He also textures his work and when I say he textures his work, and I am a fan of texture, it's my jam, it's what I do, is I put texture in everything. When he textures his work, he textures his work. He has the same texture on the walls of his bezels, on the interiors of his bezels in the back, where you only see it when you go looking. The man textures his ear wires.
Wow.
He textures it all, and it is perfect. It's beautiful. So I didn't know he textured his ear wires until I saw them up close in the class. But also, it's just a really lovely set of experiences to take, like all the collective things that he puts together, create beautiful hinges, delicate looking work, lightweight, low use of gold for the value that you get out of it. If you haven't looked up his work, check him out. He's on Instagram and he has a web page. And I have not finished my projects. This literally ended this weekend. It's a 3-day class, but I'll show you, because it did inspire me for some changes to the big project that we're working on. So I'm gonna zoom in on this stuff a little bit closer so you can try and appreciate the half and half nature of it. So this is the gold on top of silver technique. This is using my texture, not his. He does his texturing with a hammer handpiece, and it's really lovely, and it would drive me insane to texture all the things like that. But so we learned how to do the settings, and then we're making what are called saddles. So it's a hinged saddle earring or saddle hinged earring. I can't remember which way it goes. And he also cuts his own stones. So the set that I got to work on while I was in class was this pair of lovely little stones. And I also worked parallel with stones that were more likely to be my style. I have 2 pairs in the works. And the idea behind it is that you're going to put one that is pierced through.
Oh, cool.
Right. Yep. Very cool. Very cool. Hard to
Yes, I love earrings like that.
And then the other is some kind of set stone. He does mostly cabs, occasionally faceted, but it's a much more complicated technique. And then they're hinged together, right? So they go either forward, back, or left, right, as you prefer. Right? It's a lovely, lovely concept. But look at that tiny, tiny little hinge that you got to build into that, right? Oh, I'm keep moving out of frame today. Itty bitty little hinge, right? 2 little pieces on one side and 1 piece on the other. And it's a lot more fiddly than I like, but it's a good result. So I'm going to fiddle. So this is my variation with this is some glass on the bottom that I had that was already drilled the way I wanted, but you can of course drill your own. And then I do a lot with rose cuts. So I had a pair of them that I wanted to play with. So lovely class. And this was a 3-day workshop. He does anywhere from 3 to 5-day workshops, I think. And he teaches all around the country. So you can find his classes. And he will probably come back to Portland for another class in 2025. I'm not sure when.
Rachel, he has a class coming up with Mag in Atlanta, Georgia,
Oh, nice.
a
Good.
couple of weeks.
Oh, yeah, that's right. He said it was one of the 5-day ones too, right?
So 5 days?
Is it 5 days or 3 days?
It's either 3. I think it's 3.
Got it.
Yeah.
Is it on the saddle earrings, or is he doing something else? Is it gold on a
I
budget?
can't remember exactly which one it is.
If it isn't
And I
sold
think he's
out,
going to be Pocosin as well.
yep, he did say
Yeah.
that, and he might be back at Metalworks. I can't remember. He's got a pretty packed schedule.
But he's on there.
in
He's on their
Colorado.
website too.
Oh,
right
yeah,
now.
yeah, good,
Okay.
good. He's based out of Colorado, but he'll travel where the classes are. So he's also just incredibly nice and generous with his information. And the last reason that I took it was I know that I have trouble doing painstakingly detailed work the way that he does. And his work is so clean that I needed to see what went into it. And as I will often remind myself on screen, so that I'm also reminding you guys, the key to it is slowing down. He does very small, very repetitive, very precise movement for a lot of his work. He's filing tiny parts all the time. He's sawing very carefully and delicately. And he's just repeating the same actions over and over again in ways that make it, he's perfected his vibe, his look.
He also gives you detailed notes, like
Yes.
50 pages or 100
Yes.
pages.
With screenshots and video and all kinds of
Yes.
good stuff. So I absolutely would say, if you're interested in that, what he also did was show us a lot of his work, and that includes some other uses of his teeny tiny hinges. And one of them particularly grabbed me. He has a jade bracelet that is the chain links are the jade slabs that he's cut in a repeating sort of elongated hexagon. And in between, he's connected them with a double hinge between each stone that has another stone set in it. And it's inspiring because it solves that particular type of hinge, solves for me one of the challenges I was having with moving to the Hollowforms on this project that I've been working on with you guys. So let me use that as my introduction. If I zoom out a little bit and then out further, and then I can show you. Oh, come on, camera. Give myself a little more room to show you what I've been working on. So when last we met, I had shown off that the class was done construction-wise. There we go. So this is what we've been working on, is this funky built-in clasp into the Hollowform that slots in, slides in, and then folds down and tucks back into the hollow form, right? And this is reticulation silver on the top, and the rest is sterling silver. And this was off of this stone that was in a collection. For those of you that weren't there at the beginning, I was designing a basic chain, but not basic, but you know what I mean, a simple chain based off of the concept of the stone, and then realized that it was not working for me. And so that's when I went into a discussion of balancing out the weight of the stone with something else. When I started doing that on this session, on these sessions, I thought I was going to continue on in the chain model afterwards, and I may still, except that I wanted to try out some hollow form construction before I did that, and I'm sort of heading towards the hollow forms as my final method. So between sessions, what I've been working on is these hollow forms that are going to be alternating between an open and a closed, and they're definitely in mid build, so bear with me and I'll lay them out at least conceptually the way that they're going to lay out.
That's
We just
cool.
make it a little bit more. So progressively bigger and bigger. I'm not yet sure whether I need another full set or whether I'm gonna cut it somewhere in here. I've got, one of them has gone missing. I don't know where it went, so I'm gonna place that one as my placeholder. So here's what I have been building out, and when for those that were on last session, my reason for being willing to spend all this time doing it is that worst case, if I decide I want to go back to this chain, I still have another set of stones that would do just fine if I decide to stick with that, right? So I have two options. I'm going to get two necklaces potentially out of this. So it wasn't a time investment risk. If I don't go with these, going with the clasp that I'm working on, then I have other stones to put in them. So that's the start of that's where we ended last session. And in the meantime, I have been building these, and I realized that I don't want them all reticulated entirely. So what I've done is all of the left pointed ones are reticulation tops. And the other ones, here's the closest I've come to finishing one. And this is, I posted mysteriously about having designed myself into a corner. I wanted an inset that emulates the inset we have in the stone. So I don't know if you guys can see, let me zoom in a little closer so you can see the stone. So the stone is a druzy cut, and I wanted to do a repetition of it. So there's reticulation down in here, right? So it's walled on the interior and reticulation. And right now, the thing that I did in the wrong order was I decided that I wanted that after I framed the backs of my Hollowforms. So my order of operations is challenging, shall we say.
Yeah.
So normally, the problem with a Hollowform made with a reticulation silver is normally I would advise that the last thing you do is put your reticulation silver top on, because it's the most likely to melt out if it gets overheated in the course of all of the framing. So I did sterling on my backs with just a basic texture on them. And so any of the Hollowform, I mean, any of the whole Hollowforms, this was my last step, was that topper. However, I've got inset material, and I needed to cover with something. In this case, it's going to be fine silver, in case I would also like to do some kyumbu work on top of the exterior. I may not. I suspect I'm going to texture it with a wheel and maybe put kyumbu inside the inset. But because I had already built all of my back frames, rather than rebuilding them all going the other direction, I had to construct my top with the material kind of tucked inside of it, right? So, and that means that I have no way to see where I'm cutting out. So when you're doing negative space, you need to be able to cut away. the material before you put your final capper on it, because you've got to be able to get your saw in there. Well, I had them constructed already, so I couldn't do that. So what I have done is build these little platforms onto my fine silver sheet with, do I have this? This one, I think. With them framed out with enough extra material in theory to go fitting in there. I say in theory because this one I cut short somehow. I can do that in this one, I think. So, so I've had to build it out, and then I have to shorten it to the right height that it's going to rest against the back. Now, thankfully, if I don't solder this down to the back plate, it's not a problem because it's never going to show. The problem is the part that's hidden right under here is what I need to open up, right? So that's what I mean when I say I worked my design into a corner. I could, of course, have rebuilt them all, but this was a lot of material to have already put together. And so what I've done is I've built these little frames and they're lifted a little bit. So I basically, as if I was bezeling a stone, I made my wall bezeling the unusual shapes of scrap that I cut out. And then soldered that all together so that it was a unit. And then I soldered it down, but before I did, I put a little cut in the front so that it would act both as the air hole and it would give me a guide once I have this step done so that I can cut away some of this material, which is what you see in this one. All I've done is really roughly snipped away the basics of the material. This still goes way back somewhere to about there in the cutaway. And I was literally right before we signed on today was working on getting one further, but it's not finished yet, further so that you guys could see what it was going towards. In the course of that, I've been trying a bunch of different burrs and so on to see what I could use to carefully take it away, right? But in the course of using those burrs, I started with a barrel burr and realized that it was making really cool edge textures. I was thinking I was going to cut all the way to my walls, but I really kind of dig how it repeats this rough edge of the transition between the smooth and the rough of the stone. So I think I'm going to do what I've done, but refine it to a cleaner look. And not actually try to drill and saw and file away all the way. What was going to happen was it was going to be a nice clean line,
Right.
sort of like that, right? And it would show the wall. But I really like that there's sort of an underhang on these pieces that you can see the cavernous bits. So that's the evolution of the design so far. How does that relate to my class with Alex Boyd? Well, when I was first thinking about this, connections were going to be my next big challenge, right? I needed to know, I needed to know how they were going to connect. And when you work a hollow form scale on this scale, one of the big challenges is, I'm going to show this on me. One of the big challenges is how is it going to hang? Is it going to stick out off of your neck because the large forms are all wonky? Is it going to weight funny? In this case, we're putting a lot of weight off. This is offset. So the clasp is designed to go off to one side. So how is it going to roll up and over the neckline, right? And so there's a few different kinds of connections that can make that happen, not the least of which is just jump rings. A set of half jump rings connected by a single jump ring gives you maximum flexibility. It also needs to be pretty big in the wire gauge in order to take the weight, the torque of these pieces. But it's also one of my least favorite for making a piece this sculptural hang well on somebody. What happens when you have chains is the weight all pulls forward, right? The links just let it relax. So I will almost never use links on something this big and sculptural. Next option, hinges, right? So hinges, there's a whole bunch of different tube hinges that you could go with. those have challenges in their stiffness of how they roll. Another option that I've used on another piece, which I can actually bring up a photograph of because it'll make more sense, is tube hinges at the top that are not actually hinges, but they are pieces of the, oops, that's not what I wanted to do. Hang on, let me bring this image up for you guys. Open image. Where's my open image? New tab. And share screen. So this is another large scale sculptural hollow form that I've done. I probably have a better photo of it than this screenshotted one, but the connections here have the same challenge as weight wise as the piece that I'm working on now. And so what this is right at each corner is a heavy wall tube, and then a link that connects them together that is a repeat of this shape, right? So see what I mean about using the links, and the links back behind the chain are also in that repeating shape. But because it took a lot to get them through the tubing when they're square like that. But basically I run the wire through when it's in a U shape, and then fold it on once it's past the two jump rings, and solder it in place, solder it closed once it's in the ring. And what this particular one does is it gives a fluidity. I'll move back to me so that you can see my waving hands. So by putting the jump rings on either side and then a long link between it, it can do this, right? The two pieces relative to each other hinge, but they have two hinge points, not just one, as a standard standard tube hinge would be. So I've got two tube points, both flexing, which gives maximum movement around any neck size, right? It's going to, with the center piece in that one, it's going to come down the center for everybody, but it's not just going to go straight down. It's going to flex around their bone structure. And that one, I went back and forth about whether I was going to do hollows all the way through, but the rectangular shape going all the way around the back was really sort of stuck out like 1980s shoulder pads. So that was why I went to the chains on the last half of it to give it a little more flex. And that gives the opportunity for sizing up or down, however somebody wants to wear it.
Yeah, I like that.
Right. So bringing us back to the Alex hinge. When I started thinking about using a repeat of that tube hinge, it felt coarse for this particular design that we're working on right now. It felt less graceful than the rest of the piece will be by the time it's done. And so it was bugging me. It was what I was aiming for before I took Alex's class. But now what I'm wondering is, his hinges, when you do a double version of what I just showed you on the earrings there, so that it's hinging off of both sides of a center point, that gives you an equivalent to what I got at the top in terms of flex. So let me draw that one for you, because that may or may not make sense.
I didn't get that one.
Yeah, this is like, I've had to do a few different drawings of it myself just to think about it. So the base hinge, if we're looking at it from the top down, has parts that go like this and like this, right? And I will be putting this off of the points of my piece, right? So they either have to go this way or they have to go this way relative to it. Let's see, do I have a bigger one? It's gonna be a little bit easier to see on the scale. So, so my other connector, my single point coming off of here, will go like that. And then we'd go like this, right?
Right.
And so these will hinge this way. If I instead do them on the corners, they'll hinge this way. Is that making sense?
Mm-hmm. Can you
So-
draw the hinge?
Draw
Sorry.
what?
Can you draw the hinge that you were talking about on the other piece? I
Oh,
couldn't
the piece that I just showed
visualize
the
that.
photo of? Yeah, all that is literally is at the top of my shape. I'm
Right.
gonna make a pretend version of those shapes.
That's
Is
fine.
a soldered tube, right? And then I make so the tube is running the length or the width of the piece of the hollow form. Which is my funky hollow forms. And the tube that runs along it. And then I put a heavy gauge wire jump ring. It's just a funky shaped jump ring through.
Okay.
And so this has this direction and this direction movement, right, on both halves. Whereas if I had just done a single hinge joint between them,
Right.
the only thing it could do is basically fold on itself. Right,
Cool.
so, and it's a great hinge, it's just awkward looking for the particular flow of this design that we're working on today. So it wasn't quite fitting right with me, and it was part of the reason that I was still holding on to, am I going to go back to the chain instead, right? So the challenge with this is that I can't just do one or the other of these directions, because once again, let's think about how this hangs on the body, right? Some of our hang needs to have this way movement,
Right.
because some people are skinnier than I am. And so they need it to hang a little differently. But if I did all of them hanging this way, it would have the same effect as having the chain links, and they'd all just hang down and the ones in back would stick out, right? So I need to do alternating this way hinging and this way hinging. So every other point or the connections between the two units needs to make a difference to the fold. So let's go back to looking at the actual units that we've got and think about what that means. So we've got these connections that are coming all around. Some of those out of the way. And naturally, let me rotate this so you guys can actually see the angles I'm thinking about. So naturally, we have two connection types. We have a point that moves this way, and we have a together that will do better moving this way, right? That is probably what I'll end up doing. Because ultimately, that'll give me, when it goes over the shoulder at the right spot, it'll have just a little bit of flex. But what I need to decide is that the look I want, or do I want to go the opposite direction, in which case these, so if I do these doing the this way hinge, then it's less obvious when it goes up over a bump on the body. And these, as the this way hinge, it's less obvious that it's opening wider for someone, except that instead of hanging the way I've got it, it's going to do this.
Right.
And separate more.
Right.
So there's choices to be made about which direction, but either way, one of the connection points is going to need to be an up-down hinge, and one is going to be a side-to-side hinge. And then, of course, we have the very difficult decision of deciding if we're setting a stone in the tube in between each one. So I brought some stones to give it some thought, because there's not a lot that goes with this unusually off-white stone. And I, of course, have to decide if I'm setting them in silver and gold and, all the little things, all the details. So in my current collection, a few things struck me as possible.
Can I make a comment about
Sure.
your let's see, B1, 2, 3, 4. The fifth link back that you have got the raw edge on, that you're mimicking the druzy in your focal.
Yes.
Instead of doing everyone like that, wouldn't it be more impactful if only a couple here and there was like that?
It's one of the things I considered. It's just that I didn't, if I do a blank one, then I would have to think about what is the element that goes there. And so I went back and forth for a while because I tend to do that. I tend to only do a detail here and there. But this piece has grown in overall visual weight so much that I don't want to break it up with clean when I've got so many textures on it. So yeah, great observation. And 90% of my work, you'll find that I do that. I'll have an open negative space, or I'll have a different shape that breaks the pattern or something like that. And I'm always doing off center. So most of my chained collection, which is the original that this was designed for, starts out with an off kilter, like there'll be the stone in the center, and then I'll have pattern, no pattern on one side, and then no pattern, no pattern. So it's not like alternating. I don't ever like it to be boom, boom, boom. But
Symmetrical,
these
like,
textures are enough different from one another. Like it's gonna be like having a string of geodes. No two geodes are the same. So great observation on that. But I decided to go full bore on this one.
I love it.
So one of my options right now for if I put a stone in each of them is this green, it's called green amethyst, which really isn't amethyst, I think, or it's heat treated amethyst. I think the citrine is way too vivid. But I figured I'd pull it because it was something I had a lot of rounds of. I think that's going to be too poppy. Even when I'm blackened, I'm not sure that would tone down enough. It would detract. And the one that is my current running favorite is a set of sapphires that are in a range of the pale oranges and green, either beigey greens. And that is a big contender. Except it really probably means I need to set them in gold. It's just gonna be pricey. And this is already gonna be a very expensive necklace. So any thoughts or questions?
I think if you're doing kombu on some too, you said?
I'm debating whether I'm gonna do Kambu on the interiors, and that I wouldn't do on every one if I did it. That I would absolutely do 1 or 2 spots of gold on the interior layer.
So where are your little facets gonna go, on the solid pieces?
No, on the joints. So the joint connections are gonna be something, it's
Oh.
gonna be a tube with the joints coming off of them. So it's, do I put on some of the joints or all of the joints a stone in between each one? So it would be,
Wow.
yeah. It would be these points. I
Gotcha.
probably wouldn't do
Okay.
it on literally every one of them. And I don't know yet whether I want to go that route, because that may be too finished looking for the rest of the textural elements in here. Questions, comments?
What about setting a couple of them? I can't think what it's called now. I'm brain dead. Where you scrape the metal over the top of the
Yep, flush setting. None of the materials I'm working with are thick enough for a flush setting. But in the earlier stages, one of the things I've been talking about, if I don't break my stone, that would kill me at this point. One of the things I've been talking about is that I'm probably going to put a couple of very small sapphires sort of scattered like a starscape in gold in step bezels. Just little specks. But again, you gotta, just like they say on Project Runway, you gotta edit. So I have, especially because I'm doing this in stages, I would never normally design a piece of this scale in pieces like I'm doing on screen. I would have a lot more of it written down and sketched out. And it's only that I'm trying to go through the process of evolution on screen for you guys. This would be a much more compressed exercise, and it would be a lot more drawn out, like sketched out. I mean, not drawn out.
plan.
Right, plan.
I have a
plan. That was the word, simple word that I needed.
I have a question.
Yes.
So those on that one focal, that you're going to put the tube setting or whatever of the
Possibly. Yep.
three crystals, or sapphires?
Yep.
How is the bezel gold?
If I do put those on there, I will probably set them in gold tubing.
And so when you solder that onto the surface of that reticulation,
Mhm.
it's going to have to be quick and dirty.
Yes, yes. I will probably use a medium solder or a hard solder if I can go quickly enough with a tight enough torch. So I'd use a small torch tip. I will be drilling a hole beneath each one to help further. I mean, this one has plenty of places it can get out, that the liquid can get out, but I'll probably drill a hole and inset my tube. So I'm just soldering it to the frame of the hole.
Wow.
Because that'll give it a little more stability than just on, or I could also just drill far enough in to make a flatter surface on the reticulation. So drill a spot for it to rest in. Because you can, if you're doing a tube set into reticulation, you can do you can file a little bit of a curve into the bottom of your tube. And
like with a ball burr,
and you've got a little divot that you're fitting it nicely into plonk. And you put your solder down in the tube and it flows up and it doesn't go flowing everywhere into the reticulation, right?
Oh,
So
cool.
yeah, lots of steps, and it's all order of operations again, and I'm doing this way out of the normal order of operations.
Yeah. Hey, sometimes they just happen to flow that way.
Yes, yes. And yes, on the question, Jackie, that you had, do I ever use a neck form to test? I always use a neck form when I'm at that stage of things being connected, because it's way easier to back down 3 hinges in than it is, what am I going to have, 20 hinges on this thing?
Cool. I haven't used mine yet. Okay.
Yeah, now keep in mind that most of us don't actually have exactly the shape of the neck form, but
Yeah.
you can, if you're trying for a very specific feel, just like people do when they're using a dressmaker's form, you can pad it out, you can give it more cleavage, you can do whatever you need to do to adjust it. It's just that it's a good basic starting form. And I always design for large scale hitting across the collarbone and going resting, so that the weight is balanced a little bit. Yeah, it's one of the things that I do that I'm most proud of, is making necklaces that are heavy, but don't feel heavy because they're well balanced on the form. Yeah.
That's one of the things I have a problem with is I love asymmetrical, but it's a challenge.
Yeah. 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 And this one is going to be interesting to see how it hangs, because I think I've got the weight light enough on the main clasp that and that I'm doing the loop around is going to give it a little balance. So we'll see. I'll learn together. Question?
I have a question about, you were talking about the sapphires. You didn't know if you were going to do it like at every hinge and stuff like that. And the same thing that Jacqueline, is that how you say your name? Jacqueline? Jackie. Okay. But she was talking about the asymmetrical, because you had mentioned you're going to sort of do it asymmetrical. So I kind of visualize it the opposite, with the gemstones being on the opposite, to sort of bring your eye around instead of sort of in between. Because you're going to have it on the actual articulation, you're going to have some. So I see it as on the opposite.
So don't overdo it. Just keep it light on the other side as a balance. Yeah, that's an interesting look. This is one of those things that I can decide once I've got the hinges constructed, but before I've riveted them together. So I don't have to, I can tap the ones that I don't want to set anything in. If I go around and do it that way, and I could even just do like a little gold disc on top of each one that I don't put a stone in instead, or black and silver. I'll have to decide. I could even do them capped in reticulation silver. I've got enough scrap that I could punch little discs and then clean them up.
That'd be cool.
It would be, but it's going to be a boatload of tiny filing to get them looking good. So that one may be maybe low key. So the padded out neck form, it really, I'd like to just grab some foam or bubble wrap or whatever and put a little fabric over it. I don't usually have to do that because I've got a pretty full form to try things on once I've got them shaped. But basically, if you've got somebody that doesn't look even proportionally close to what you've got on your neck form, then you can just add shape to it. Or if you're going, if you're trying to build something intentionally sculptural, there's a lot of snag programs where they're looking for, spikes coming out of you and competition level creative art jewelry. So, any
I have
other
a couple-
questions? Oh, sorry,
I
go
have a
ahead.
couple of mannequins that I use for display for show, so that would be fine for assembly too.
Yeah, yeah. Gives
I
you,
didn't think about
that'll
that.
give you a great sense of how it looks on the body form with everything else. And that's the other thing, when you're getting close, sorry guys, I got silver dust in my eye. When you're getting close, put it on an outfit, put a nice blouse under it on your mannequin form and see what it looks like.
Done that. Too funny.
Yeah. I think I need to go get some eye drops and clean out this eye because it's really irritating me. I'll be back in 2 shakes. And then unless there are other questions, I'm going to show you a couple of the Hollowforms because I left some to be constructed and show you how I did those interior segments. And we'll go from there. So I will be
Awesome.
back 3 minutes. I just got to run upstairs and grab some eye drops.
Carmen,
Mhm.
I really liked your leather bracelet that you showed with the watch band. That was really cool.
Oh,
I've
thank
seen,
you.
yeah, I've seen
That
some
was
people
nice.
take, yeah, I've seen people take them and use them for different things, but there's some really cool watch bands out that I've seen that would be really cool used like that.
Yeah, I just sort of played around with it today, and part of
Awesome.
me was kind of like, how am I going to keep it on the brass? Was my thing. So that's another design challenge for me. And the fact that leather is so, I mean, fragile in a way, because depending on the thickness of it and the type of leather that it is, was my other thing. So it's nice to hear that
Carmen?
you like that concept.
Carmen, do you treat your leather bands?
I use the conditioner. I bought
Yeah.
conditioner that they usually use on
For saddles?
sofas and things like
Yeah.
that, and it's helped. It's helped.
I find saddle soap really, really good for leather,
Saddle
especially
soap?
leather belts.
Oh, okay. That's good to know.
And I'm so jealous of you guys over in America. You have got so many unbelievable instructors.
Yeah,
Well,
We're
lucky.
really isolated
your
here.
way too. Are you Australian, New Zealand? Where?
I'm from Queensland in Australia.
Oh, nice. Okay. I mean,
Yeah,
I
very
would
nice
teach in
weather, but
Australia if I was invited to teach in Australia.
I wish I could bring you over.
So what
It's
time
the
is it for you
distance.
then?
Sorry?
What time is it for you right now?
It's 10:45 a.m.
Oh, okay. Not terrible then. Good.
No, not
Good, good.
terrible at all.
Well,
It's
thank
when
you.
it's 2 a.m. in the morning, I can't cope.
Yeah. Yeah. And unfortunately, most of my virtual classes are done on Pacific time, so or close to it. I try to adjust. If I know I've got East Coast students in the United States, I'll shift it a little bit, but yeah. Well, I mean, you've got people at least close to your time zone. Lucy Walker is only a couple time zones over from you, right?
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
and she does a lot of classes, and there's somebody else out in that neck of the woods that I was seeing on video. I'll try and dig up some names for you of other folks, because surely there are great artists in your neck of the wood too. Oh, that sounded like a brag. There are great artists everywhere.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Any last questions about what I have done to date?
Oh, no.
Okay,
Every
so let's talk
session,
Hollowforms. Pardon?
every session, I mean, every session you're adding more and more and more.
Yeah, this is not a scale of necklace that I expected to be doing on this project. I was expecting we'd spend like a session or two on each project that I pulled out of the box. But this one has taken on a life of its own because the stone is just too spectacular. It deserves something bigger. And frankly, the clasp mechanism has been really exciting to develop. Because one of the things that I am hoping to do at some point in my career is actually write a clasps book. And I just
Oh,
have to
cool.
figure out how to get a nice long window of time to do that.
Hmm.
Can you show your class one more time?
Sure
Close.
thing. Yep.
I took a class with Suzanne Williams on her
Nice. Okay.
hidden class.
So this is tucked behind. It lifts
That's a
it,
bar. Oh, okay.
and
Cool.
some of the key factors are that the cutaway is narrower than the actual piece that you're putting through, and the three prongs together create a scenario where it hooks back in and can only go in one way, and the
Yeah,
angle
that's cool.
make sure that even if there's so hidden away under here that you can't see right now, but is on the earlier videos, is square bar nested inside of there so that there's only one place it can snap into in that back corner. Right, and even if it comes loose of that, because it's at an angle, it's when it's against the body, it's going to be really hard for it to accidentally come loose without somebody noticing it's on its way. So that combination of elements keeps it from easily coming apart. Right?
And that definitely has to,
Say again?
that's cool. That definitely has to lie down on your breastbone then
Right. Right.
to function, to get
Yes.
on and off. That's cool.
And you can see where it's going to rest if all goes as planned. Oops, on camera. So ideally, it's going to rest right about there,
Cool.
with the other piece coming in, the smallest unit coming in at the side here,
Cool.
give or take, right?
That's gonna be cool.
Yeah, I hope so. Some years from now when I'm done.
So I
Yep.
was just curious, when this piece you started, you were doing the wire forms with the
Mhm.
triangles, and have you
Yep.
abandoned that now? Or
So
is
the answer is that until at the end of last session, I was really just in a try it mode. And it was because of that hinge issue that I wasn't thrilled with my vision of the hinges. It wasn't feeling right for it. I now need to make a series of the Alex Boyd style hinge and see if it's going to work the way I think it will. In which case, I think I'm sold on this being a full-scale Hollowform piece. But I mean, I'm still enamored of both looks, you know, if we go back to the, here, let me lay that out before we start working on Hollowform stuff. So, and we still haven't solved for the, how am I connecting each of these two? So I dabbled in just chain links on this one to see what it got me, which didn't entirely thrill me. Missing a couple of these. There we go. So this was our original baseline. Something along those lines. And it's still a really elegant look, but it still has some design challenges to it, right? Like, what do I do with the spiky bits? And to me, if I were going to do this look, I'd need to redo all the links in at least in a heavier gauge, because this is now too big for the scale of the wire work. Right, so that was one of my earliest, when it was just the stone, and it was just gonna be a stone in a bezel, the scale was proportional.
But you could use those two smaller stones that you showed, or one of the two with
In
that.
this, sure, yeah. That would
They're
be,
more,
that's doable. But yeah, I think, you know, my heart wants what my heart wants, and my heart usually wants hollow forms.
I love it.
I love those kinds of funky chains, and I make them every chance I get with a really unusual stone. But this has sort of grown beyond that in the architecture. And
Definitely.
okay. So Hollowforms and reticulation insets. So let's see. I have sets of pieces that are going to need the insets put into them. And the insets I'm building up, I think this one goes with this. No, this is the one that I keep thinking goes with that, and it doesn't actually. Yeah, that one goes with that, and this one goes with this. So because I made these in a batch, and you know, I knew I wanted a progressive set of sizes. I made all of my frames at the start, and just so I could have units, and it's 2 of each size because I can make them and flip them. And then at that point, because I wasn't thinking about these insets, I did my back plates on all of them. And so that's a pretty straightforward. Solder the edge with the hard solder, solder the frame down with either hard or medium, depending on how your torch control is. On these, I tend to use medium, and I tend to flood the heck out of them if I know I'm not showing my interiors. I want them nice and well soldered down. So I've got this couple of pieces that I can use to demo that, except that I think I needed to check a size between one of these.
And are those all sterling?
Sterling and fine silver and reticulation silver. So when I'm doing Hollowforms, if I know there's a chance I'm going to Kyumbu it, I'll do fine silver on my top or bottom or whatever components I'm thinking I'm going to Kyumbu. I think I may have actually, yeah, it looks like I did fine silver walls on these as well, which means they need to be a little heavier gauge. So these are probably a 20, yes, they're 20 gauge fine silver walls, but the back plates are sterling. Because that, and I think those are 24 gauge. That gives it just a little more stability. So my walls are not the weak point on a Hollowform. And the gauge I use for top or bottom depends on what I'm going to do with it. So I'll give you the short version of what I spend several days going into great detail on in my Hollowforms class. I'm going to set stones on top of my Hollowform. My top wall, my top surface, either needs to be much thicker and more durable, or I need to consider putting some little struts underneath it, which can be in the form of tubing or wire or whatever you want. I would probably, if it's not much that you need, I would just probably put a couple pieces of heavy gauge wire down and make that so that I can have something to push against. Now that's like if I'm talking about putting this kind of a stone on top of it where I need to push a lot. If I'm just putting a tube setting on it, one of the choices is to do your top and drill through and set your tube onto the back plate and solder it in place. What I mean by that, let me draw that one. Put my pen down, there we go. So if I've got my walls, my bottom plate, and my top plate here, if I'm going to put some tube setting in, I'm going to potentially just drill a hole and run my tube all the way through. So it is its own support. And then the stone is set in the top here, right? So, the order of operations is going to count a lot. In this one, you could put your top on first, drill holes where you want them, and they act as your air holes for the Hollowform. And then the last thing you put on is your back plate, right? But there's a bunch of different order of operations issues based on your materials too. And I am using some challenging materials. Because reticulation silver melts out at a much lower temperature because of the way that the metal concentrates, it's higher risk. Same deal with mokume gane, right? If I were topping it with mokume gane, I would, one, never use anything, no hard solder once the mokume gane hits. It has to be medium or easy. And two, I would be really, really careful to try and do that mokume last. Of course, then we talk about shape. So shape impacts, where's my piece of what I was doing before? Shape impacts your order of operations too. So I've got a domed piece, a concave piece in these earrings, right? Much harder to put a concave piece in and get it lined up as my final act, right? So this simple little form here had double challenges. It was a hollow form that one side was a domed mokume gane and the other side was reticulation silver. So there's a battle for which is at greater risk and which is harder to do. And in this case, I went for, it's much harder to center a domed piece when you can't see the backside of the dome to show where you're setting it. So this one I had to choose mokume, risk, and dome, and it shows because my mokume melted out a little bit, so I've got raised material between the copper and the silver. Versus, am I going to melt my easy to melt reticulation silver? Is that right? So both of these suck for hollow form choice, and both of them would argue that they are the last thing you want to do in the process. But then the counterweight on mokume being the last is because I did a concave, it was much harder. I had to do it first, right? And then we talk about things like, are you doing cutaways? So if you're cutting away, whichever material, if you're doing a cutaway that's only on one side, let's say that I did this as a cutaway instead of as an intentional hole that was already in the mokume. I would need to do this side first in order to really easily be able to cut out my pattern that I was cutting away, because I can't reach my saw through when there's something in the way, right? So these are you'll hear, if you take my Hollowforms class, you'll hear me talking about order of operations nonstop, and you're going to want the definitive list of order of operations, and I cannot give it to you because you have lots of different factors that play into what we're doing, right? So in the case of my situation, I was thinking, oh, I'm going to do all of these reticulation ones. So I'm going to put my back on first, and then I'm going to do my reticulation. And then I started looking at them all chained up, and I was like, damn, that's a lot of reticulation. There's a whole lot of reticulation next to each other. And that's kind of going to get boring if it's all reticulation, right? And that's when I went, well, what if I do something else in between? Except I had already done steps that make this part hard. So that's where I'm stuck, or rather I have to find my workaround, which I'm going to say was a happy accident, because if I had done it the way that I would normally do these, the order I wouldn't have discovered that I really like this idea of the underhang, right? I wouldn't have been fighting the material to cut away, only to discover that, hey, I get a cool texture and a cool effect. So embrace these, they're not accidents, they're evolutions, I guess I would say, of the process, and learn from them. And yeah, you're going to wreck material sometimes. You're absolutely going to have material that's screwed up in the course of it, but that's part of the learning process too. So questions about that order of operations spiel? Or anything that you're considering, and you would want to know what order of operations I recommend for your process.
So the reticulation that has a little hole was a mistake? It melted?
No.
Or did you
So, well,
intentionally-
yes and no. When I was reticulating my sheet, I had a large sheet of reticulation silver. I was reticulating, and I burned through the reticulation sheet, which happens fairly frequently, but it's also part of the coolness of it because it gives you great edges. I happened to have scraps when I was taking my class and deciding so we were really only learning how to do the actual open version of these, the tunnel, they're called tunnels. So it was the big version of the ones that I showed you being made from little tubing, right? This one's done from tubing. This one is done from sheet metal, just like you would do a base ring for a spinner ring. But I wanted to try pushing it further because anybody who makes tunnels, their tunnels look like a tunnel. I do something, I'm making it fit with one of my collections. So I decided to cap it. I could have left both one side empty. I could have left the back empty, but I had the scrap. So I went for it.
Okay.
And built in air hole for my pickle and so on. So bonus. Plus it looks kind of like a moon. And I think that's really cool. If you're going to have something big and interesting in your ear, why not make it extra interesting?
Is there a philosophy behind that whole
A philosophy
situation, for wearing them?
behind gauged?
The actual tube, whatever you call that.
The tunnel?
The tunnel, yeah. Is because I see some people with it on and some people without.
Well,
And it's
one of the
really
benefits of a
stretched.
pass-through tunnel as opposed to these capped ones is that your ear can take an earring hung through it, which gives you more weight you can put in and more variety. So once you've got I'm waving at you with my other camera hand. Once you've got a tunnel in your ear, right? I can string earrings that aren't necessarily my size or that are overweight through it, and the weight is taken by the tunnel through the hole, right? So that's part of it. And also you'll see a lot of modern manufactured gauged earrings are kind of funky stuff. Like people make them out of bone and ivory and wood and there's some gorgeous glass work done in borosilicate glass for large scale piercings. If you have never visited one of your local tattoo and piercing shops, I would highly recommend it, if nothing else, but to look at their earring collection because it's inspiring. There's some amazing stuff in there. So even if it's not your jam, I mean, I only have standard piercings. I don't have multiple piercings. I got nothing, but it opens up some of the jewelry making that you can do in some really interesting ways.
Cool.
Other questions about order of operations on Hollowforms? Okay, I'm going to do my base plate because I've already committed to doing all of the alternating ones backwards, so I might as well keep going. And of course, let's see if I actually have enough of my back plate. I'm going to roll some. I thought I had plenty of this made, so maybe I will not be putting down stuff that fits. No, it doesn't fit. One fit. That one fits. So that's a squeak, but it'll fit. All right, so back plates, of course, you want to make sure they are nice and flat. A few different ways to do that. Not the least of which is hammering, or if you've got a hydraulic press, put it between two plates. I think I might need to anneal this before I do flattening. Let me go over and anneal this because we want a good clean connection between our walls and our back plate. And this is, as I said, sterling. So I'm going to just do a general anneal.
Can I ask what your fun little zigzag thing was that you took off your firewalk
Oh,
there?
that's a Lion Punch Forge titanium device that Chris Anderson made for Hollowforms. And so I saw it when I was taking Nicole Ringgold class out in Georgia, and I was like, well, I do Hollowforms, I better check it out. So it's got these neat combinations of hole sizes, and you can configure it in different ways to create, like if you're doing spheres and so on, you can rest the sphere up and get a little air underneath your piece. And so I've been playing with it and I kind of dig it. I feel like I want larger scale versions of it for the work that I do, but it's got some neat possibilities, and rather than pulling out a nest of some kind, when I'm doing little stuff that I need to get under, as you'll see when I'm soldering on our troublesome pieces, it's a nice lift. It's an easy lift and it stays flush and flat. He's got it on his website. If you're interested, I can't remember the exact name, but it is something he designed for Nicole, or inspired by Nicole's work on her kind of hollow forms. And so I checked it out. But boy, you put hollow form in the name, and I'm probably buying it. So one of the things that I find people don't get taught a lot is when you're trying to flatten something that's being particularly troublesome, lift a little bit against the curves and hammer it down from there, and you'll get some of those big curves that want to fight you out of the way. That'll do for now. All right. So I need to make sure that I actually have enough space all around, which I'm squeaking to have on this particular piece. I prefer to have a little bit more material to every side of it, because that gives me leeway for the flow of the piece, especially when it's not imperative that it stay exactly the shape I've got. I can do a little futzing if it moves on me, but I do want to, speaking of shape, I do want to tighten up the shape because it's a little too curvy. So I'm just taking my pliers, my flat pliers, and straightening my walls a little bit, because the other ones were a little more squared up. This one has a little hinky stuff going on. And when you're doing matched pairs like this, it is imperative that you mark your top. Otherwise, you'll find that you've made two left shoes, right? I don't want two left shoes. I want the matching pair opposite each other. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. This is hard to keep in screen. There we go. So again, just making sure that my walls are actually upright and following the curve, don't have any weird lumpy bumpies that I don't want. One side is just a little curvier than I'm happy with. That distortion has not wrecked it for what I want. That looks pretty good. And I'm looking relatively flush, and I want to make sure that this matches the other half that I did. That size. Again, double checking my match. So I've marked my top and I've got it right. I'm going to pop this over to the bench. So I like to use paste solder for my sorry, not paste solder. I like to use paste flux for my hollow forms. The white crispy part is particularly useful, and I'll show you why when we get to the second phase of this. It doesn't show as well on the first phase. So I'm pretty generous with my flux on this one. If you're doing a lot of big scale hollow forms, you may want to also do the Prips fluxing to try and help reduce fire scale, because it's a large form that you have to heat for a while. So it often takes, it's often at higher risk of fire scale than a smaller piece that you can get in and out of faster. You can find all of my medium solder that I've been going through like crazy. And when I'm doing hollow forms, I tend to cut fairly good sized chunks of wire solder. If you're working in gold, it's a whole different ballgame. You want tiny pieces, lots of them scattered around. But I like big, flowy pieces of solder for this particular exercise. And in a perfect world, you've got a really much more flush setup than I have right now. Mine is a little wobbly on here, but I'm gonna, because I've done enough of these, I'm pretty aggressive about using my tweezers in midstream to force the piece down when I need to. If you want to get good habits, you won't leave as much gap as I've got here. Let me see if the other direction is less gappy. Okay, so that gappy, yeah. That was a little bit of it, something about that inside. No, it was either way. So I'm rushing a little bit to demo, but I would like you guys to do a better job of straightening everything than I have done when you are working your Hollowforms. And one of the reasons I like the white crispy style flux is it really indicates temperature change for you, but it also creates a little indicator mark on the metal. So if you stop at the white crispy point, and I'm going to show you this here, but I'm going to show it again when we tap something off. You lift your piece off, there's a little frame outlined in the flux where the piece sat. And that becomes, when we're closing up, that becomes super critical to help you figure out where you should be putting your solder down on the underside when you can't actually see underneath the piece because you're closing it up, right? So keep that in mind. It doesn't happen when you use just a Prips flux really, but with the white crispy paste flux, like a handy flux or things like that, it does a nice job of marking it out for you. And when I'm putting my solder down, I put my solder a fingernail's width from the wall. I don't put it butted up against the wall. I put it just outside the butting up point because our walls are often thinner than our back plates and therefore will heat up faster. And we've probably all had the frustration of the solder flowing up the side instead of under when we don't get our heat balance right. By putting it that fingernail's width away, it gives you an extra moment to get your heat focused on the outside to get it to draw out. You're okay, you're absolutely okay if you learned how to do your soldering from the outside going in, but I find especially on Hollowforms, I want it interior so that I'm not messing it up on the outside. I have less to clean up, and the insides are usually hidden, so nobody will see it if it blobs. So why not put it on the inside? All right, so with this, because I know I'm a little bit not level, once I've heated everything, I'm just gonna use my steel tweezers to sort of go, hey buddy, hang out down there. And that takes out some of the lift before I go to the next level of soldering. And I'll also check to make sure that I'm close enough and that I haven't moved off of my back plate in any weird way. And then I'm going to concentrate on heating my back plate because solder follows the heat and we want our heat to be coming under the outside from the inside, but we don't want to melt our walls. I also try to avoid focusing my heat towards the main seam because sometimes that'll open up if you overheat it. And once I see my flux give that indicator of going clear or reddish, I know I'm getting really close. Press them again. And I'm looking for one of them to start balling up. I'll focus on that. Get it flowing. There we go. And as soon as I see it flowing, I go to the outside and come around at the angle that goes right at the wall. And using my pliers to encourage it down if it wasn't 100%. I think I got it. Yep, we're good all the way around. So once you see it flowing, bring yourself outside and at that angle to get it to flow. So we've got our back plate down. I'm going to give it a moment because this gets real hot and we don't want to hard quench it or else it might cause the metal to fatigue. So I wait 5 or 10 count and then quench it. And at this point, because I used fine silver walls, I don't even need to really pickle before I go to the next step. But I do need to go over and put my drill hole in. It is technically possible to, wrong camera. It's technically possible to get a single closing up of a Hollowform in one swoop without it bursting. However, if you miss even the slightest fill on your final closure, it'll cause you problems. So, what is healthier for you and less likely to scare the bejesus out of you when it explodes is that you put at least one drill hole in. And usually what I try to do is think about where I'm going to be able to hide it most readily. Is it going to go under a stone? Is it going to go under a soon to be clasp, hinge connection or something like that? Where can I hide it? Or I make it consistent across the entire piece so that every single unit has it in the same spot on the design. If you put two in, your life will be even easier. You can put them at opposite ends, because then there's what happens when you only have one is that air traps the pickle inside. If you have two, air can get past it and it flows out more easily. That said, even if you do two holes, one of the best ways to clean the pickle out is a little syringe. And you pull the liquid out and you push in a baking soda compound afterwards, and you keep flushing it with cold water after it's gone blue and so on. But by doing the baking soda water flush, if you leave your piece to air dry after you've plunged and pulled it in and out, when you look at your piece, if you see any of the bluish green crystals forming anywhere around your seams, it's a gap in your seam, whether you saw it there or not, right? So it's an indicator. It also means you didn't get all your pickle out, so you got to do a better job of rinsing. But sometimes I'll not rinse terribly thoroughly just to double check my seams, and I just usually let it sit overnight. That's also when it's the end of a night of lots of soldering and I'm feeling uninterested in cleaning everything out. You can also use canned air to blow dry out the stuff, or you can put it on your block and lightly heat it with the holes pointing away from you, knowing that you may be spitting acidic air if you haven't cleaned it out well. So it may get all over your tools and rust them or whatever. So really only do that if you're pretty confident you've cleaned it thoroughly. So that's step one of our Hollowform. Any questions on that phase of the soldering? Okay. And the next thing that I'm going to do is figure out where that I cleaned up all my fine silver too, because I need fine silver for the top. And we're going to do a top row. Yes. Up too much. If you saw my desk my bench 15 minutes before class time, you would have seen utter chaos, this panic mode trying to get my stuff put away from the two classes. All right, so one thing that I tend to do is once I have done my base frame, I'm going to do a rough trim. I don't want to get rid of all the material on the edges, but I want to get rid of enough that I'm not creating a little overhang that is going to block heat in along the, oops, I'm on the wrong camera again, sorry. So I trim away most of the edging, but not right up to the edge on my first pass. Because I want to not, if I have too much hanging over and I now go to heat for putting my other plate on, I'm going to create a little oven in certain sections along the wall that will cause it to be more likely to melt or burn off the top, flow the top when I don't want it. So I don't want excess material here. And if I take too much away and I overheat, then I'm going to shift my piece off of my back plate. So it's this happy medium of trim it away some, but not all. I'm also going to put a small drill hole in so that I don't forget that part, because I tend to. Oops, that's the wrong bits. I did it wrong piece. Oh, perfect. I already got one ready. So I'm just going to put a starter divot in. With fine silver, you got to be a little careful with that you're not pushing in against the silver too much. And then I'm going to just drill a single hole through here, enough to get me a way in when I need it for the pickle to come out. And I like to take a file and just deburr the hole that I've made so it doesn't leave any scrap. in the back.
And you're putting the hole in the wall.
I am putting the hole in the wall because that's the place that is going to be least noticed on this design. If I knew I were setting a stone on the top, I would put it on the top or something like that. Or if I'm piercing it, hollow forms don't have to be solid. So some really beautiful hollow forms include cutting away of pierced patterns in the back wall. But in this case, I am literally just using it to make sure that I have a pickle escape when I need it. So the other thing I need to do is I need to make sure that the top is flat as possible. And because I used bezel wire for this, I know it's pretty flat, but just as a proof of the exercise, I'm going to do a little bit of that. And then one of the tricks for making sure you're hitting flush is to run your Sharpie along the whole segment that you're going to work on. And when you sand, you can keep an eye on, are there high and low spots? Are there, the low spots will continue to have Sharpie on them after you have scraped down the rest. Doing a little of that, and I got a little bit of Sharpie showing along this wall and a little bit right there and there. So a tiny bit more. When I'm not using bezel walls, I like to cheat on this step. I have a flat grinder, a belt sander, and I do a lot of my work to flatten these on belt sanders. And then I clean out the edges because the belt sander makes a big ripple, like edge on these. So I'll take my file again. Usually, in this case, I'm usually using a crossing file. There we go. And I just run it along the interior because I don't want any of the scraps that may have come up from the sanding or grinding to interfere with the quality of the seam that I'm going to have when I put the other piece down. Now, if I were going to be topping this with my reticulation silver, I would be trying to flatten the high spots on the back plate of the reticulation silver to get as close to a solid fit as I could. If you've got really wavy, lumpy, bumpy, then if you have the patience, you can mark out where the lumps hit and file down a little bit to give the little divots where the bumps will rest. But it'll generally usually take me 2 passes to properly solder down, because I'm going to have to solder all the places that solder cleanly. I'll discover that I've got little gaps where I didn't have enough flex in it. I'll have to do a little hammering down of my reticulation silver to get the spots. Like you can see, I've got one tiny little spot that didn't hit down on this. I'm going to go back and flow a little more solder into that just to get it fully closed up because it doesn't look great. But so don't be alarmed if putting down your reticulation solder takes more than 1 round of soldering the top down. In this case, however, this is one of the ones that I'm making one of the insets. So I'm going to
After you finish,
Yep.
after you finish this, would you show us your fill on that other piece?
Yes, if we have time. We've got only
Okay.
half an hour left, so it may have to wait for another
Okay.
time. But really, this is where I come in and I use chip solder because I can stuff a little tiny chip in that little space and get it to flow again, making sure again that you haven't blocked your air hole when you're doing that. I have a boatload that are going to need touching up. So if I haven't touched them all up before our next session, I can do that during that.
Cool.
But again, that's the
Thanks.
thing that in the full weekend long, it's a 3-day, 8 hours, 7 hours, 7.5 hour day class. I'm giving you the super speedy version of some of the features of that class. All right, so now I need to make an inset for this. I want to first make sure that I have my matched pair. Where did the other ones go? Matching this? No. Where's my other half? Yes, okay. So I've got my match set and I now want something that is going in the same direction as all of the other pieces, which means that it needs to swoop with the look of the piece. And I was roughing these in. I wasn't designing them to all look the same. In fact, I was going quite the opposite. And I don't have any curves left on this piece. I have some good curves on it. And I need to think about the fact that I'm going to actually be installing it this way, because I'm building the piece that's going to be resting on top. What I mean by that is you can see some reticulation silver here, but that's not what's going to show when I cut away. It's the silver that I hid underneath the piece, which is to say, well, I can't show it to you because it's already soldered down, but what you'll see what I'm talking about in a moment. So my design is being built upside down because of how I designed myself into the corner. If I had done it top first, I would be able to see all of this action that I was putting underneath, and I could cut away and do all of that carefully. But either way, this is a tricky one because I'm trying to sort of rest it inside of the piece. I could have soldered this down to this and ground it down. But then I'd have to guess at my opening. I wouldn't have had an obvious, where do I start opening? So this one, I sort of screwed myself up on this one. So what I want is, when I am cutting through this piece, when I am looking at this piece, I want my curve to come through showing on this. So this is my good reticulation side. This isn't as interesting, but I'm going to do a little bit of curve, make sure that I'm doing this right. This is the direction. Yes, this is the direction. And I think I want to make this one go a little further down than that. So I'm going to go bigger. So I'm just going to make, going to be cut across the top. And proportionally, that's about where I want to be. So this is a really jagged edge that I'm intentionally making that jagged. And I'm going to saw this puppy out. And reticulation silver is challenging to cut sometimes because it changes gauge. I'm just using a 2/0. Come on. You can, when it gets stuck, you know it's some of the thicker material. So again, this is what I'm expecting to show to the world in this segment. I'm going to trim that front edge with shears to just give it a little bit cleaner straight edge, because I need it to bump up against the wall when I'm done. So that's going to be sitting, resting here, but lifted a little bit, right? So the next thing I need to do is make the frame for it so that it's not just lying flat, which was an option. I could have gotten that no lift look by just putting it down at the bottom, but that was not what I was going for. So I'm pulling out the same heavy gauge bezel wire that I used for the outer walls, and now I need to bezel this. I'm going to trim a little bit of that chatter that comes in from filing off just to make sure it's clean. And now I make the funky bezel. And when I'm doing a bezel like this, I need to start on halfway up one of the longest components, give or take, and find my bends. So in this case, I'm using a combination of pliers that get me my tight cornering. And I'm just going to create that first point. Really crisp the bend up on the sharp point. Because my goal is to make something that's so snug of a bezel that it holds the material in place. So that includes all of these little ins and outs that I've got sitting around the material. See enough to get it there. That is not a tight fit to that corner yet. And this is something that could easily take, 20 minutes per bezel when you first are starting to do this kind of setting. Because it's just a stone setting. But you got to get really good at fitting those corners in. When in doubt, make it a smidge small, because before we actually attach it, we're going to be soldering it closed, just like we would, say, a round bezel if we were making a bezel for a round stone, and then refitting it to the piece. So if we've given ourselves too little space, we can stretch it up. But if we've given ourselves too much, we have to go cut some out and resolder. Find this much easier to do when I don't have to worry about blocking my own camera views for you. Again, key is getting good crisp corners when you have a corner. And it's way far away from where I need it to be. And in this particular case, I'm not afraid to kind of mangle the material to get what I want out of it, because it's ultimately going to get hidden away underneath, and I'm going to clean it up either way. Whether I go all the way to the edge as originally planned, or whether I leave it rough. It's still getting some work done to it. Okay, so I can see that the tip of the horn here, I have a little too much space. So I'm going to do that, make it smaller than I think it needs to be thing, in order to make that something that I adjust once I've got it closed up. Fingers are tired of these. And when I'm doing all these insets, what I'm also doing is, every plier under the sun gets me a different curvature. So sometimes just bringing in the half rounds or the rounds gives you a little push right where you need it. I'm going to cut this a little shy. You can see I've given myself a fair amount of gap, and it's a little more extreme than I would normally do, but I can see I've got some gaps that I'm not filling yet. So by doing it that small, I'll have to stretch it at the corner points. And then I'm just going to treat it like any other bezel. I'm going to get a clean fit. Not my fit on the two edges a little bit. It's a sloppy cut. Make sure it's snug. I'm going to hop over and solder this with some hard solder. My curtains closed. It's dark out. Reflections. All right, so This one's quickie solder with hard. If you have challenges getting your solder to flow on seams like this, one trick is to put your solder underneath it. This is great for if you're having trouble with chain links and so on too. You can take a piece of solder, rest it on the ground, and put your seam right over it, and then draw your solder up, because solder will flow up that path of least resistance. Or you can, what I'll often do is pick solder, but I'm going to show this technique just because it's a good one if you're not yet comfortable with pick soldering.
Can
We
you
don't
switch your
see
camera?
you.
Oh, I didn't switch to the right one, sorry. Oh, shoot, thank you for asking. All right, so that thing that I just described, I'm going to show. So I've taken a small piece of solder, put it on a flat surface. I like to go the perpendicular to the line, or to the wall rather. And then I put my seam right down on top of it. I'm using an acetylene air torch. With silver, you need to warm up your other material, not just the seam, and then focus on the seam when you're ready. It's a little off center there though. Come on. There you go. So you can just draw it up. Like that. Or if you prefer, you could take a piece, pick solder it to the top, or tweezers. Pick soldering tends, when you get proficient at it, pick soldering tends to be one of the fastest ways to solder. But it's not for everyone, especially if you have shaky hands or whatever. Find the method that is most controlled for you. So now I've just got a basic frame, and my exercise is to get this to fit in all the right places. So I'm going to start with my hardest corners and get those tightened up, which looks like I may need to use a couple different shapes of pliers to get a little tuck in there. It's kind of funky turn, too much turn. I'm going to blunt the tip of this point because it's just a little too spiky to bend around. Oh. And so before I start actually stretching the material, because I did make it pretty snug, I try to get at least roughed in. And I can see that my point is one of the problem areas, but I still have leeway up at the top. So I'm going to do that first. Figure that off a bit. And then I'm seeing that I probably need to do a little bit of stretching just to get past the corner. I want to get my biggest curves and zigzags in before I do that. So see, I'm sort of 3/4 of the way in, and I just don't have quite enough material down at the point. Now, of course, I could chop some of that off and get there from there. But an exercise in stretching any bezel, you can use round pliers if you don't mind marring the sides, or you can use half round pliers, and you put the flat side where you don't want to mar, and you're just squeezing. But the half rounds aren't going to stretch as fast as the other pliers, the round rounds. If you really need to stretch, you use the round rounds. And you want to be sure to squeeze equal squeezes from top and bottom, because what's happening is it's spreading the material this way, and then you need to spread it the other way to balance it out and keep it a straight edged wall by the time it's done. Just going to do a little bit at a time and see how it's fitting. I started from that. I'm getting there, but I think I need to go to the big guns. So with this kind of squeeze, especially on a fine silver, you can almost watch it stretch. You see those marks that I'm putting in, that's stretching it a good chunk every time I do that. Most very, very close. I usually try to hit on the same spot where possible from both sides, just because that makes the most balanced stretch. And again, I'm looking for super snug because my goal is that this piece is held in place when it's all the way wrapped around. I've got a little extra material in that upper corner. Want that a bit.
Rachel, why are you using round nose versus the half round?
The round nose go faster to stretch, but they make marks on the piece. And since I'm not concerned about those marks showing up in this particular design, because they're tucked underneath the hollow form, I'm going to go with what goes faster for the squeezing.
Okay.
Or if you're going to texture the wall of your bezel or anything like that, if it's going to get sanded or filed away anyhow, use the speedier, more expeditious way of stretching. So close, I can taste it. So I'm at the point where now I have to really make the difference of the tiny little adjustments at each notch that I've got in the material in order to get it in there snugly. And some of that I may be able to do by careful tapping with a hammer and nail or something to push it into place. Because I've got decent fit. I need to use a little bit of that material up. There we go. So I'm just sort of forcing the shape to conform to the metal beneath it. Yeah, that's going to be almost there. So you can see how close I am to fitting. This is good because now I can take out a hammer and a nail or something that can tap me in there and make sure that it goes in really, really snugly. And mark that. One little corner blob. I think I'm going to resort to filing a little more of my point off because it's giving me grief to get the corner done. And the only problem is they look kind of like New Jersey when they're in this state to me. It's gonna bug me. Straighten up some of these walls a little bit, otherwise it's not gonna ever fit the back plate. No. Come on. You know, this is the part that's like watching paint dry. See Rachel fight with the tiny little bezel adjustments. Oh, there we go. All right. Fairly happy with that. It's sort of midway down the piece. And I'm going to be able to solder it into place, which I'm going to do next. And then I think that may be where we're going to cut it. Yeah. Okay. Let me solder this and we'll call it a night after that. Because all I'm doing at this point is working from the back side. And this is another one of those flood with solder situations because I really want it to hold and not have leak points. So I'm putting my flux down. And I'm going to actually do stick soldering for this one because I want to gap fill a little bit of what I'm seeing between the curves and the material. So I just get a big long chunk so I don't burn myself of my wire solder. Heat. And in this particular design, this is a bit of an angle and I'm okay with that because it sort of replicates the angles that the stone itself has cut. If I were doing something more precise, I would probably have marked the height that I wanted the piece to come in and rested it against some cuts in the metal that would create the fit that I wanted, you know, flooding the heck out of it all the way around. You know, oops, a little bit missed. And the back side that I'm soldering on is not going to show to anybody, but the front side may. So I want to come around and just make sure that it actually flowed through to the plate and it looks like it got all the way around. So that now gives me a component that I will be flattening out and filing down a bit so that it meets the level of the main hollow form. Like that. I'll show you what I got over there. And we'll call it a nonce. So this is going to ultimately be resting in here. But the way that I have to do that is build its back plate. So I'm going to attach it down to the fine silver this way and cut away enough to tell me where my point is that I need to cut so that I can then put it back on and solder that little guy hidden away inside the center plate. Questions?
I'm
No question?
confused.
Yeah.
I'm confused with the soldering, the way you just laid it out. The piece you just soldered, you put inside the hollow form, like
Yes.
right now.
Yes.
And then you're gonna open the other side?
No, so I can't just solder it in and cover it because I don't know where I have to cut away. So what I need to do is make, let me see, I have one of the other ones that I didn't yet solder down. So what I'm doing is I'm creating, see this little gap? I don't know, maybe too small for you to see. Hang on. You see the gap
Yes.
that I've cut away?
Yes.
That's my indicator that tells me where I'm gonna be starting my cutaway up top in order to have it, because I can't otherwise get to it. Right? I can't see where I'm going. So I need to cut away. What I did before I soldered these down is I sawed away
Mhm.
to my cutaway point.
You're off camera.
Oops, sorry. So I'm before I solder this puppy down, I'm gonna
Mhm.
saw away a chunk that gives me my opening on the
Mhm.
top plate, so that when I solder it down, I know where to start carving out
Oh,
the excess
okay.
material, right? Because it's all buried in there if I have it lifted, and I'm sure that if I had done my order in the opposite direction, that I would have more flexibility to figure this out. But my challenge is either know where I start from one side or know where I start from the other side and have it open and then have to position exactly where my opening is, which is a lot more challenging with this abstract form. So we will pick it up next time. I'll probably have done some of the remaining Hollowforms and cleanup work, but I'll try to keep a couple interesting bits. And I will try to model one or two of those hinges that I was talking about to see if that's actually going to do the trick. Or who knows, by November you may find that I have built the original wire ones back up in heavier gauge because I got persnickety about it. I don't know. I don't think so, but it's a possibility.
You got two of them going on.
I
so.
do. I don't know what I'm going to do with myself having two big projects going at once. Any last questions or things that'll keep you guys going on your practice between now and reminder, not the 3rd, but the 2nd Thursday of November? I'll send out reminder emails.
What day
Thank
does
you.
it fall on? The 2nd?
It's the 2nd Thursday, 2nd Wednesday, so
Or-
it is November
13th.
13th instead of the week after.
November 13th?
Yep. Yep, and I'll send out, it's gonna still say the date, the original date in the notices, but I'm gonna send them out and send out a bulk email as well, like I do when I give a big update.
Okay.
And as always, hop on the Facebook group and post pictures if you're working on stuff that you have questions and ideas needed. And I will hopefully see y'all in a few weeks. The video, what's my schedule looking like? I might get to the video as early as midway through next week with my current schedule, but it'll get posted. And if you subscribe to the channel, you'll get notices when they go up.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, gang.
Thank you.
Happy making.
Thanks.